Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When an engineer builds a high-tech fence to protect his land from a tyrannical HOA, he sparks a cold war of surveillance, sabotage, and silent revenge. What begins as a boundary dispute becomes a legendary battle for freedom, truth, and ultimate justice. Welcome to Zone 7. I've always liked lines, clean edges, measured boundaries. Probably comes from being an engineer. So, when I bought my 5-acre plot just outside Crescent Falls, the very first thing I did, even before hauling in the workshop equipment or testing the soil for groundwater, was mark the perimeter. Not with cheap chain-link trash or some suburban Home Depot pickets, no. I built a double-layered, pressure-treated security-grade fence. Inside that, motion sensors. Above, wired HD cameras with infrared. Power sourced from my solar grid and backup batteries in case of blackout. Entry gates, biometric, with backup RFID. I wasn't being paranoid. I just knew what kind of neighbors I'd have. You see, Crescent Falls wasn't just a community. It was a curated illusion of control where lawns were inspected like military formations and mailboxes needed HOA pre-approval. The crown jewel? Karen Drake. Queen of cul-de-sacs, widow of the original developer, and the type of woman who probably sharpened her eyeliner on the bones of non-compliant homeowners. Problem was, I didn't buy in. Literally. My land butted up against Crescent Falls, sure, but it wasn't part of their homeowners association. It never had been. The original property line was drawn up decades before that subdivision was even built. I confirmed everything. Title history, surveyor records, zoning maps. I had county approval for the fence, permits filed, documents signed, didn't matter. The first letter from the HOA arrived before I even finished unpacking. Your perimeter structure is not in alignment with the Crescent Falls aesthetic. They actually use that word, aesthetic. I laughed, tossed it in the shredder, and went back to calibrating my gate sensors. Then came the second letter, more aggressive, demanding I replace the industrial materials with community-approved fencing design elements, whatever the hell that meant. I ignored that one too. The third time, Karen herself showed up. She didn't come alone. She brought what I assume was her backup coven, 2 women with clipboards and matching yoga pants. They stood outside my gate like the gates of Mordor would just open for pure entitlement. I'm sorry, I said into the intercom, this is private property. If you're here to sell something or preach the gospel of synthetic cedar fencing, I'll have to pass. You can't just wall yourself off, Karen snapped, her voice hitting a frequency I'm pretty sure only crows and bureaucrats can hear. Your barrier violates community visual standards. It's not your community, I said. Not from this side of the line. That was the first real spark. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that she couldn't reach me, not with fines, not with bylaws, not with her little laminated rulebook, and that to her was unacceptable. After that, things got persistent. HOA cars began parking near my property more frequently. I'd find drone footage of my land posted on their Facebook group, conveniently framed to make the security fence look like a war crime. I even had someone dump HOA branded flyers in my mailbox, despite the bold black no soliciting sign I had bolted right to the post. Still, I didn't engage. I figured, let them scream into the void. I was busy getting my systems online, wiring the motion alerts into my phone, testing weatherproof enclosures. The idea was simple. I wasn't going to start a fight, but I sure as hell was going to be ready when they did. And then came that morning. Nothing special about it, just coffee in hand, watching the woods from my deck, dogs fed, system check green. Then the alert came through. Motion detected, south fence line. I tapped into the live feed, and I froze. There they were. 4 guys in neon vests, one with a hydraulic excavator, Crescent Falls HOA logos on the trucks. They weren't standing around. They were working. Hard. One guy ran a chainsaw right through the fence posts. Another flagged the digger to roll forward. The machine's bucket came down like a mechanical guillotine and ripped through 12 feet of my fence like it was tissue paper. I could hear the engine from my porch. My thumb hovered over the panic button, the one wired to call county deputies, but I stopped myself. I watched, and I listened. Karen herself showed up not 5 minutes later, walked right up to the man running the crew. I zoomed in, focused the mic. Do it quickly, she said. He'll yell, but that's all. He'll realize he has no choice. That was it. That was the moment. I didn't call the cops. I opened a new folder on my hard drive, and I labeled it Operation ZN7. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry. That part was surprisingly manageable, but because anger is a blunt tool. What I needed was precision. My whole career had been about that. Find the weak point, measure the pressure, and wait for the moment when the system collapses under its own bad engineering. So I sat in my workshop with the lights low and the monitors humming, replaying the footage frame by frame. Every face, every badge, every serial number on that excavator got its own folder. I isolated audio clips, enhanced them, filtered out wind noise until Karen's voice sounded like she was whispering directly in my ear. Do it quickly. He'll realize he has no choice. Oh, Karen, if only you knew how much choice you were giving me. By sunrise, I had a full digital archive structured like a prosecution manual. Evidence categories, timestamps, cross-referenced files. My old co-workers used to joke that I labeled my sock drawer with QR codes. They weren't wrong. Around mid-morning, while coffee brewed, I sent a formal records request to the county land office. Just routine maintenance, nothing dramatic. For the past few years, the county had digitized all land parcels into a central GIS system. If anyone tampered with boundary data, even by an inch, there'd be metadata, logs, footprints. I didn't expect anything unusual, maybe incompetence, maybe sloppy mapping. What I didn't expect was an email reply faster than my coffee machine. Mr. Green attached is the Crescent Falls HOA supplemental map submitted 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. That was before my fence was ever touched. I opened the PDF. At first, the map looked normal. Same topographical lines, same borders. But then I saw it. A highlighted section right on my southern boundary. Only it wasn't marked as mine anymore. According to this updated version, a long stretch of my land was now Community Access Reserve, a public path, a shared zone, a place where technically HOA personnel retained rights of maintenance. I leaned back in my chair and let out a low whistle. That took nerve and stupidity, two qualities Karen possessed in industrial quantities. I opened the original county map, the one I had saved from the day I purchased the land, and placed it side by side with the updated version. No natural shift, no surveying correction, no legitimate boundary resolution would reassign 20 yards of private property into community access. This wasn't a clerical error. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was fraud, and not the amateur kind. This had intent, planning, signatures. There was a note at the bottom, submitted by HOA President C. Drake with supporting survey documentation. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Supporting survey documentation? There were no new surveys, no contractors, no markers. I walked that line myself weekly. Karen had forged a cadastral update. And the county, overworked, understaffed, probably drowning in paperwork, rubber stamped it. Because why wouldn't they? HOA presidents don't usually submit fake maps, but apparently there's a first time for everything. I forwarded the file to 3 different secure cloud backups and printed a hard copy on paper thick enough to double as armor plating. If this thing was going to burn down Karen's castle, I wanted a trophy, but the day wasn't done. By noon, I noticed movement through the woods behind my workshop. Not animals, humans. I checked the live feed. 2 HOA maintenance volunteers, that's what their shirts said, walking along the border, pointing, taking photos. One of them held a clipboard with what looked suspiciously like the doctored map. I recorded everything. When they left, I walked the property line myself. Took my own photos from every angle, every marker, every boundary pin driven into the soil decades ago and untouched since. There was no ambiguity. Not a millimeter of that land belonged to Crescent Falls. And that's when I realized something important. This wasn't about my fence. It wasn't even about property lines. Karen wanted the land, not all of it, just enough to force a precedent. If she could get one stretch reassigned as community access, she could argue the whole southern edge should fall under shared maintenance. And once the door cracked open, even by an inch, HOA rules would come pouring through like flood water. Destroy the fence, submit a fake map, claim historical trail access, slowly rewrite reality until the truth didn't matter anymore. I wasn't in a neighbor dispute. I was in a quiet war. So I wrote a name on the whiteboard in my workshop. Phase 1, evidence harvesting. Then below it, Phase 2, containment. And under that, darker, bolder, Phase 3, Zone 7. But that would come later, much later. For now, I needed to keep my mouth shut, keep watching, Let them walk deeper into the trap, and they did. They always do. By the end of the week, I'd seen enough. The footage kept stacking. HOA volunteers on my property line, snapping photos, pointing with the righteous arrogance of people who think an embroidered logo gives them divine right. Karen hadn't slowed down. If anything, she was accelerating. And me, I was done watching. So, I built a gift. It arrived on a Thursday at 2 a.m., rolled in on a flatbed under a dark canvas tarp. My buddy Derek owed me a favor. He runs logistics for a robotics testing firm out of Jefferson City. No questions asked. We dropped it on my property precisely 3 feet from the boundary line. Not an inch over. My measurements were exact. They always are. By sunrise, the tarp was gone. In its place stood a black rectangular monolith, 10 feet tall, 8 feet wide, 6 feet deep. Smooth graphite panels, thermal ventilation ports, a reinforced base bolted to a concrete slab. No windows, no markings, just a door on the side, sealed shut with biometric lock. It hummed softly like it was breathing. I knew how it looked. That was the point. Crescent Falls awoke to a nightmare they didn't understand. I called it Zone 7. By noon, HOA was in full peacock panic. Karen herself stood across the line, phone in hand, flanked by 2 board members and a man who looked like he'd never smiled in his life. She screamed up at the cameras. I had mics, of course, demanding I explain the purpose of the structure. So I did, via a press release, to the local paper and the county zoning office. And the Crescent Falls HOA mailing list, which, funny enough, had an open online portal I'd signed up for months ago under the name Herb Granger, retired widower. The message read, Subject, Private Infrastructure Announcement, as a peaceful response to the unauthorized destruction of my lawful fencing and the submission of falsified boundary documents. I have established a secure modular unit within my property lines. Zone 7 is a multi-purpose observational node, currently serving as a mobile research lab in cooperation with the Department of Environmental Acoustics, University of Missouri. All data collection is legal, passive, and compliant with state and federal regulations. Welcome to the observation era. Every sound, every step, recorded, archived, peacefully, respectfully, legally. Russell Green, HOA lost their minds. Karen fired off a dozen emails to the county. I know this because one of her own board members, disillusioned after the fence stunt, quietly forwarded them to me from a burner Gmail. She called Zone 7 an intimidation device, a paramilitary threat, and my personal favorite, a private NSA. She was partially right. I did model the internal layout after a Tier 1 signals trailer. The inside was more than wires and screens. I built a full sensor suite, LiDAR sweepers, directional mics, IR mapping, EM sniffers, all running 24/7 backed up to 3 cloud servers in 3 different states. Technically, it was a private environmental study pod. Functionally, it was a black box with eyes. But the pièce de résistance, the screen. On the outer wall facing the HOA picnic area, the community reflection space, as they so pretentiously called it, I installed a 4-foot outdoor LED display, weatherproof, motion-triggered. During the day, it cycled through footage of the fence destruction, slow motion, zoomed, with subtitles. HOA President Karen Drake. He'll realize he has no choice. I made sure the audio was crystal clear. By the second evening, I started receiving calls. First, it was the county fire inspector. He asked if I had an open flame permit for whatever that thing is. I sent him the paperwork. Then came zoning, noise ordinance review, FAA inquiry about potential radio emissions. All standard, all answered with formal documentation. Every permit tight as a drum. I'd spent days preparing. Weeks, really. The beauty of legal revenge is that it's boring on paper, but glorious in motion. The 4th day, someone tried to approach Zone 7 with a drone. I jammed the signal midair, caught the thing in a net rigged from the roof, and dropped it on Karen's lawn. The footage of her trying to retrieve it in a bathrobe made my entire weekend. Still, I didn't speak to her directly. She tried. Oh, she tried. Yelled at the fence. Left notes. Even called the sheriff once, claiming psychological warfare. But I kept my face off the grid and my voice behind press releases. There's nothing more infuriating to someone like Karen than a man who won't play by the rules she invented. Meanwhile, HOA residents, those who still had a working brain, started to whisper. I knew because I had parabolic mics tuned to conversation range. They wondered if Karen had gone too far, if the map thing was even legal, if maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the villain. I didn't need to convince anyone. I just needed them to watch. Zone 7 did the rest. By the end of week 2, HOA was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater caught on a barbed wire fence. Karen had filed so many complaints, I started keeping score. Fire code, noise ordinance, temporary structure violations, emotional harassment through architectural aggression. That one made me laugh so hard I nearly cracked a rib. But the crown jewel came on a Monday morning at 9:13 a.m. when I got a formal letter taped to my gate from the Office of Code Compliance and Public Safety. It had the official seal, the kind printed in silver with that weird heat-embossed stamp designed to intimidate people who still fear bureaucracy more than God. The letter stated that a temporary research structure on my property had generated multiple community reports of disruption and requested voluntary removal pending further review. Voluntary. How civil. I looked at the letter, then at Zone 7, which was humming softly under the morning fog like a sleeping beast. I smiled. It was time, at 5 a.m. The next day, I began what I would later refer to in my case notes as Phase Omega Strategic Submission. First, I shut down the LED screen, blacked it out, removed the video loop. No announcement, just silence. Let them wonder. Then I pulled the battery stacks offline, not permanently, just enough to disable external visual cues. The whole cube looked dormant, quiet, harmless. The press releases stopped. The email responses slowed. No more HOA mail intercepts, just nothing. Karen smelled blood. By Friday, the HOA Facebook group, which I still had full access to under my dummy account Herb Granger, lit up with victory dances. Russell Green has deactivated the cube. He finally came to his senses. Community pressure works. They scheduled a celebration, I swear on my mother's grave, an actual neighborhood brunch. The reclamation breakfast. Mimosas and passive aggression at 10 a.m. Sharp, right in the community garden within shouting distance of Zone 7's darkened shell. I didn't attend, obviously. I was busy drafting a federal complaint. Let me back up. 3 days prior, while HOA was too busy to notice, I'd hired a private land surveyor from Columbia, licensed, bonded, state certified. I walked him through every pin, every original stake, every iron rod that had been in the soil longer than Karen had been alive. We mapped the original boundary, again, and compared it to the doctored HOA version. The result? 21 linear feet of my property, incorrectly labeled as Community Access Reserve by the Crescent Falls HOA, submitted under falsified survey documentation. Boom. With that report in hand, I assembled my payload. It included the original county parcel data, the HOA's revised map submission with Karen's signature, a notarized statement from the licensed surveyor, and a full timeline of the fence incident with HD footage, GPS coordinates, and witness logs. I sent the full packet, hard copy and encrypted flash drive, to the Missouri Department of Real Estate Fraud Enforcement and CC'd 2 local news stations, 1 university legal clinic, and a journalist who owed me a favor. I made no announcement. Let them believe they'd won. Karen even showed up at my gate the day after the brunch. I watched from the workshop, coffee in hand, as she planted a little HOA flag in the dirt outside Zone 7 and took a photo next to it. For Instagram. I recorded the entire thing, obviously. Later that night, while Crescent Falls slept off their victory hangovers, I uploaded Zone 7. Internal systems were never offline, just hidden. Now though, they had upgrades. Directional dish mic arrays, long-range IR mapping, seismic sensors keyed to human footstep frequencies, environmental masking cloaks. It didn't just record movement, it studied patterns. And it found some interesting ones. Like how Karen's car had been parked near the county records office the same week those doctored maps were filed. Or how HOA contractors kept inspecting properties near my boundary, ones that, based on old development plans, would be worthless without access to that stretch of land. Patterns, motives, data, all of it, quietly building in the dark. Let them drink their mimosas. I was pouring concrete. I always knew Karen would overplay her hand. People like her don't know how to win quietly. They only understand dominance when it's loud, performative, and printed in HOA newsletter font. So when my supposed surrender made it into Crescent Falls' official community bulletin, complete with a full-page photo of Karen beaming next to her little flag outside Zone 7, I knew the clock had started ticking. And I had set the timer. 48 hours later, the first public crack formed. Local Channel 9 ran a segment titled "Private Citizen Alleges HOA Property Fraud." It wasn't front-page material, not yet. But the anchor's face was a little too intrigued for Karen's comfort. They showed drone footage, mine leaked anonymously, a clip of my fence being demolished, and a blurred copy of the community access map, side by side with the original county record. The caption, "Lines crossed. Cute." Within an hour of the segment airing, I received a dozen anonymous messages through my site's contact form, mostly HOA residents, some angry, some curious. One message stood out. I knew something was wrong when they claimed the trail was always ours. My parents built that fence. I remember it. They're lying to us. Signed, anonymous, Lot 48. So I opened the next front, information warfare. Zone 7 had collected enough data to build an internal timeline, but now it was time to go public. I launched a new microsite, Zone 7 Watch. Crisp, clean, minimal design, no ads, no rants. Just facts. It had an interactive boundary map with time-stamped overlays, a Hall of Documents section, scanned letters, permits, and fake HOA submissions, a video archive, fence demolition from 3 angles, audio enhanced, a Meet the Board tab, with bios and quotes, all legally sourced from public HOA minutes. But the real killer feature? A leak portal. Anonymous residents could upload internal documents, meeting notes, screenshots, and they did. By the end of the week, I had HOA financial statements, emails discussing strategic development pressure, and, most damningly, a PDF marked Karen Plan Final. The Karen Plan. It was a 3-page strategy memo about reclaiming buffer zones through reclassification, social pressure, and, quote, passive demolition of non-conforming installations. In the margin, someone wrote, "Green's fence is the weak point. Once it's down, others will follow." I printed that one on acid-free paper and framed it. Meanwhile, Karen was scrambling. Publicly, she was still doing her Queen act. But internally, I could see the shift. More HOA board meetings were happening off-record. Residents started whispering. Some even emailed me, asking how to leave the HOA. One guy sent me a copy of his own deed asking, "Am I really obligated to stay in this mess?" I recommended a lawyer, several in fact. Then came the real earthquake. On the following Monday, I got a manila envelope in my mailbox. No return address, no postage. Inside, a flash drive and a single sticky note. "She's breaking the law. I won't be part of it." You didn't hear it from me. The drive contained recordings. Real ones. Not just hallway chatter. These were internal HOA board Zoom meetings, downloaded straight from the admin's account. Karen didn't know someone had been screen recording the whole time. Highlights included a board vote on whether to let the fence get damaged naturally. Karen saying, "The county won't investigate unless he makes noise. We just have to hold the line." One member asking, "What if he sues?" Karen's reply, "Let him. We'll bury him in process. HOA always wins." Oh, Karen, you beautiful idiot. I uploaded the clips to the press portal of Zone 7 Watch. No fanfare, no commentary, just the files, raw, ugly, damning. The site traffic quadrupled in 2 days. Then came the email from a small legal firm in St. Louis, a partner who had seen the case, loved the documentation, and offered full litigation support pro bono for the principal of it. I took the meeting. We filed notice of intent to sue the HOA of Crescent Falls for property destruction, fraudulent documentation, harassment, and attempted unlawful reappropriation of private land. Total damages sought, $1,700,000. The press release hit local media by Friday. It included the headline, quote, "A fence is not just a line in the dirt, it's a legal declaration. They crossed mine. Now we go to court." Karen's HOA newsletter that week was oddly short, just 1 paragraph. Due to pending legal matters, the Crescent Falls HOA board will be limiting public statements at this time. No kidding. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and smug bureaucracy. You'd think something as explosive as a civil suit for nearly $2 million would take place in some grand federal hall with marble columns and gold trim. Nope. Just room 204 at the Boone County Courthouse. Beige walls, flickering fluorescents. A judge who looked like she'd seen enough HOA drama in her career to last several lifetimes. I wore a dark gray suit, clean, pressed, no tie. My lawyer, Savannah Hill, a litigation partner with the patience of a saint and the bite of a timber rattlesnake, leaned over and whispered, "Today's not about fireworks. It's about letting them implode." I nodded. That part I understood. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a white blazer like she thought she was walking into a ribbon-cutting ceremony. She had a new lawyer, some stiff from a mid-tier real estate defense firm who clearly underestimated how deep in the mud she was. First hearing was to determine if the case would move forward to trial or be dismissed under community governance immunity. HOA boards love hiding behind that one. Problem was, that defense only works if you're acting within the limits of your authority. We weren't talking about issuing fines for uncut grass. We were talking about falsifying property documents and using heavy machinery to destroy private infrastructure on land they didn't own. The judge asked one question. "Mr. Green, do you have proof your land was misrepresented?" Savannah stood and gestured to the screen. We played the drone footage first, the one with the split-screen maps. Karen's forged community access version next to the official county GIS record. Then came the surveyor's report, then the board meeting recordings, and then the crown jewel, the video of the fence demolition, with the clean, amplified audio of Karen saying, "Do it quickly. He'll realize he has no choice." That one hit like a grenade. Karen shifted in her seat. Her lawyer turned to her, visibly rattled. The judge scribbled something on her pad and said flatly, "This matter will proceed to trial, and I strongly suggest the HOA obtain full legal counsel. This is not small claims nonsense." We walked out of the room without saying a word. The trial date was set for 2 months out. That gave us time to build the full case. Testimony, expert witnesses, even former HOA members who now wanted to testify against the board. 1 week later, we subpoenaed all internal HOA communications related to the property border dispute. Savannah said it with a smile. If there's even one email where they talk about making an example of you, we win this in our sleep. There were 15. One said, if we apply pressure and paint him as non-compliant, residents will back the board. Another, it's easier to push a buyout once the fence is down. He won't want to fight forever. But the real kicker came from the construction foreman, the guy who ran the demolition crew. He was subpoenaed to testify, didn't even try to fight it. I'll never forget what he said on the stand. I told her it wasn't legal. I said we had no clearance to be on that land. She told me to shut up and do the job, or she'd report me for breach of contract. "Who told you that?" the judge asked. He pointed straight at Karen. You could feel the oxygen leave the room. Karen tried to object. Her lawyer jumped in, claimed the man was disgruntled, but by then it was too late. The documents, the emails, the voice recordings, it all formed a perfect pattern of willful misconduct. At one point during the second day of trial, Savannah stood up and presented a timeline, a wall-sized poster board with a simple title, "The Plan to Destroy Russell Green's Barrier." She walked the court through every step. The fake map submission, the silent sabotage, the media manipulation, and finally the celebration brunch. You could see jurors exchanging glances. They didn't need a law degree to smell the rot. On day 3, Karen cracked. Mid-cross-examination, when Savannah brought up the memo labeled Karen Plan Final, she snapped. "That was private board discussion. You people don't understand the pressure I was under." The judge gave her a warning. Karen kept going. "People like him don't belong next to communities like ours. He was building a compound." Savannah turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I move to strike that as prejudicial and irrelevant." The judge didn't even blink. "Motion granted. Mrs. Drake, another outburst like that and I'll hold you in contempt." Karen sat down, trembling. By the end of the week, the only thing the defense had left was some vague argument about preserving community standards. It didn't land. We rested our case. I didn't know what I expected when the verdict came down. Maybe a tight-lipped ruling, a dull speech about civil code, some legalese buried under more legalese. What I got was justice. Loud, clear, undeniable. The courtroom was silent as the judge reviewed the findings. Karen sat 2 rows ahead, jaw tight, eyes darting, like she was trying to remember a version of the world where she still had control. Her lawyer looked like he was mentally reformatting his resume. The judge cleared her throat and began. This court finds the Crescent Falls Homeowners Association, under the direction of President Karen Drake, liable for willful destruction of private property, fraudulent misrepresentation of cadastral data, civil harassment, and unauthorized occupation of land. I felt Savannah's hand press briefly on my shoulder. Just a small signal. Here it comes. The court further finds the conduct of Mrs. Drake personally egregious and beyond the authority granted by her role in a community governance position. There was no gavel slam, no dramatic orchestral swell, just words, precise, surgical. Karen tried to interrupt, actually stood up, and began with, "Your Honor, I'd like to clarify." The judge cut her off like a guillotine. "Sit down. You will have your opportunity to speak. But make no mistake, this is not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated act of coercion and fraud." Then came the numbers. The court awards Mr. Green damages in the amount of $1,100,000. This includes compensatory damages for property destruction, punitive damages for fraud, and additional reparations for the intentional emotional distress caused by the HOA's coordinated campaign. The room spun a little. Savannah shot me a quick grin, but it wasn't over. Furthermore, the judge continued, due to the criminal nature of the fraudulent property filings, this court is referring the matter to the Boone County District Attorney for criminal prosecution. And just like that, Karen's face drained of color. That was the shift, from smug to scared. Pending that investigation, the judge said, the court hereby suspends Karen Drake from any position within the HOA. A temporary board will be appointed under county supervision for the next 24 months. The HOA shall also bear the cost of full boundary restoration and dismantling any structures that encroach upon Mr. Green's property. Karen muttered something under her breath. I couldn't hear it, but the bailiff did. He stepped forward. "Mrs. Drake," the judge said calmly, "if you'd like to escalate your situation from civil to criminal contempt, please continue." Karen said nothing, but she didn't need to. The next day, it hit the local news, then regional, then the blogs. HOA tyrant faces jail time after land, grab scheme backfires. Turns out, people love stories about overreaching HOA dictators getting the boot, especially when it's got drones, secret recordings, and a guy with a silent black cube named Zone 7. A week after the trial, the Boone County DA confirmed charges, 3 felony counts, falsification of public records, abuse of position, and malicious destruction of private property. Maximum sentence, 5 years. The deal she got, 3.5 years, with eligibility for parole in 18 months. They let her out of her own home in handcuffs. Someone recorded it on their phone. I didn't post it. I didn't have to. The Zone 7 watch site had its own ecosystem now. Volunteers, contributors. There were memes, articles, even a podcast. One headline read, "When HOA Met Engineer, The Rise and Fall of Karen Drake." It made me laugh, sure, but not because I was celebrating, because it was finally quiet. The new board never contacted me, not once. They didn't ask for a meeting, didn't request clarification, didn't send me a single piece of paper, which, after months of nonstop harassment and unsolicited HOA newsletters about trash can placement and mailbox height, was glorious. All I got was a certified letter confirming boundary recognition and a printed apology signed by the interim board. It read like it had been edited by 6 different lawyers and a PR consultant with a Xanax prescription, but I appreciated the gesture. I had the letter framed, not out of pettiness. Okay, maybe a little, but mostly because it meant something simple. It was over. Almost. I hired a crew to rebuild the southern section of my fence. Not the same as before. This time I went overboard. Triple reinforced posts, vibration dampening footings, ceramic coating, and motion detecting spotlights triggered by trespassers or entitled leadership figures. But the centerpiece, right on the edge of the old breach site, mounted 12 feet high between reinforced steel beams, was a glowing LED screen. Permanent, solar-backed, IP67 rated. On it, in bold white letters, 24 hours a day. You broke it. You paid. Next time, trespassers will be publicly featured. Sometimes I loop the old video. The demolition, the audio, the close-up of Karen saying, he'll realize he has no choice. I never added commentary, just raw footage. Neighbors didn't complain. Some nodded when they passed. A few even came up to the edge of the line and gave me a quiet thumbs up before walking away. It was the silence that said the most. Then came the letters. Not from Crescent Falls, from people outside of it, nearby communities, residents in other HOAs, small landowners like me who'd faced the same pressure, same manipulation, same subtle war over boundaries and silence. One letter read, "I showed your site to our lawyer. Our HOA backed off, thank you." Another, "You gave us a blueprint. We called it our Zone 8. And then there was the knock at my door. An older couple, probably in their 70s. Tired eyes, weathered hands. They owned 5 acres 2 towns over and were in the middle of their own dispute. They asked how I set up my surveillance, what kind of fence would hold, if I knew any legal clinics that still believed in property rights. I poured them coffee, told them the same thing I tell everyone now. Start with a fence, then come the cameras. And if they still don't listen, give them a gift. I never trademarked the name Zone 7. It doesn't belong to me anymore. Now it belongs to anyone who refuses to be erased by a laminated handbook and a suburban dictatorship. And that, finally, is enough.